I'd like to call the City of Hemet Planning Commission for March 3rd to order. And if you would stand with me for the invocation and flag salute, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Dear Lord, help us make decisions that will impact our community in the most positive ways. Thank you. Second agenda item is approval of minutes.
Chair, if we could take a roll call.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. The roll call, please.
No problem. Chairman Overmeyer.
Here.
Vice Chairperson Ollerton is absent with notice. Commissioner Tiffany Lieberton is absent with notice. Commissioner Van Arsdale.
Here.
Commissioner Worth.
Here. Okay. Now the approval of minutes. You get a chance to look it over? Can we do the minutes? We have a quorum for the minutes? Okay.
I'd like to move approval of the minutes.
I'll second. That is passed. Item number 3 is public comments. So that is anything that is not on the agenda. If there's anything that anybody'd like to discuss that's not on the agenda tonight, now's your chance. If not, so again, number 4 is the variance 20001 and conditional use permit 19014 Menlo Wireless Tower.
We're going to be discussing variance 20-001 and conditional use permit 19-014. We're calling it the Menlo Cell Tower. This is an unmanned 75-foot wireless facility disguised as a eucalyptus tree with 12 8-foot panel antenna, 36 remote units, radio units, 1 2-foot microwave antenna, 1 GPS. It has room for 1 additional co-location. It has 1 generator at grade level. It's a 30 kilowatt cabinet and an enclosure that's 20 by 36. The lease area is 720 square feet. The property is a 2.39 acre parcel, and it's currently vacant and undeveloped. The general plan is neighborhood commercial. The zone is neighborhood commercial, and to the north and south is residential, and east and west, the zone is commercial. Here's an aerial view of the property, and this is the approximate location of where the enclosure will be located. This is a site view, a site plan, showing the access road that's going to begin at Menlo with the hammerhead to access the enclosure. And in here is a site view showing distance to residential, because we're going to be discussing that. Due to the ordinance section that says a major facility should not be located within 100 feet of any property containing residential use. Along with the conditional use permit, we're also considering a variance. Major facilities are permittable with a CUP in the C1 zone. They are not permitted in the R zone. So the adjacent property to the facility is zone C1, but it does have a residential structure on the property, and that's why we're looking at it a little bit, or giving it special attention. Section 90-016 of the Hemet Municipal Code says that for the purpose of determining setbacks, wireless telecommunication facilities will be considered as a principal structure, and the setbacks will be those that are in the zone in which they are located. So in a commercial zone, when it is adjacent to commercial zone, the setbacks are 0 for the rear and for the side. The second part of that section of the code says, except If a wireless facility is located within 200 feet of a residential zone, then the setbacks for the requirements shall be for such a residential zone. So in the residential zone, setbacks vary from 5 to 15 feet on the sides and 10 to 20 feet on the rear of the property. This, of course, is not a residential zone, but I just did want to bring this to the attention. Now, in another section of the same wireless facility code, section 90-1621, it says that a major facility should not be located within 200 feet of any property containing a residential use. The zone is not mentioned. So the adjacent property has a residential structure. It's vacant. Attempts to verify the use by the applicant have not been successful. If we measure from the enclosure edge to the property line, it's 135 feet. If we measure from the enclosure to the residential structure, it's 249 feet. Staff felt that the 249 linear feet distance met the intent of the section, which, if we consider the maximum setback for residential, would have been 15 and 15 feet, because that's what this section of the code reads. So we would have a 30-foot setback if the commercial was adjacent residential. But then we also have this in the mix, 200 feet. So we can say that 230 feet is an acceptable distance, and the project is proposing 249 linear feet. This is the elevation view of the eucalyptus with the north and the east views. The applicant is proposing real trees around and landscaping. And of course, this is the tree. This is the south and the west view. These are views from a top view, showing that this is where the 8-foot panel antennas are, and then the remote radius. This is 12 here and 12 here. I don't know if they're like in layers or levels. This shows 12, but there's 36. And then this view shows the landscaping, the eucalyptus tree, the cabinet, and generator. That's going to be the layout within the structure. These are the photo simulations from Menlo. Oh, what happened? Sorry. Okay, here is a view showing the tree from Menlo. Here's an aerial view. This is from that little street, Garfield, which is to the east, just beyond the Promise Church. And this would be the view. And the Planning Commission has authority to approve CUPs. The Henry Municipal Code requires that wireless facilities go through the CUP process. And then, of course, the conditional use permit can be approved, denied, or modified. A public notification was sent to property owners and tenants for a 500-foot radius. And the notice was also put in the Press Enterprise with a 10-day hearing. And at this time, we have not had any comments regarding this proposal. This project is exempt from CEQA as it fits under the section of infill development. And staff recommendation is that the Planning Commission adopt resolution number 20-006, approving variance 20-001 and CUP 19-014, subject to the conditions of approval, and direct staff to file a notice of exemption with the county clerk. This concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. Do we have questions for staff?
Quick question regarding the generator. One of the quiet ones, I'm assuming?
I don't have the decibels.
Yeah.
I think the report does say that it's a low.
It said it was low noise and
Noise.
stuff, but I just... Depending on your hearing capability.
I don't know how often those kick in.
Uh-huh.
It would have to be an emergency situation.
Yeah, just, okay, not a problem.
So was that, the house that's there, the residence that's there, the report said it's non-conforming, that just simply means that the zone has changed, but the house was originally approved with the proper zoning?
Yes, that's correct. It's a non-conforming, and we couldn't confirm that it was residential because it has a parking lot in the front, and it looked like it was being prepared to use for commercial.
But there's no permit for conditional use permit or anything for
There
them
wasn't.
So did we try to contact the property owner?
We did, I did. It seems that the records that are available regarding property owners are not completely up to date. I was also received information from the applicant that Promise Church owns that property, and I did try to contact the Promise Church to confirm that and to see if they could give me any information, and I did not receive it.
So we're not 100% sure.
We're not 100% sure of the use of that property.
But are we sure that it's owned by the Promise Church?
I couldn't
Not.
confirm that.
And then the other question, just for clarification, the setback requirements are for structures and things of that nature, and that's more just for clearance from property lines.
It's a distance from the structure to a property line.
But the 200 feet is more as for radiation from the antenna itself.
Distance, yes, from the facility.
Well, on that question, how did we get that 200 feet? Do we know where that came from?
No, we don't know where that came from. It's
Was
part
it
of
like-
our ordinance.
Yeah, but it probably was, this is something that was standard, and I wonder if it was because of a perception of a safety concern or something, they felt like 200 feet was a good number. Because the way I look at this is, whether or not it's non-conforming, it's commercial, but it could be residential tomorrow. The owner could come say, hey, we're going to move in there, and then they could build an accessory dwelling unit closer to the property line that would be within that, right to that 135 feet. And so that's why I wanted to know what was the reasoning for that 200 feet, and we don't
But
know.
if they do that, then they are in the commercial zone, so it would be the same as if somebody built over there on the other one we just approved over by Century 21.
Mhm.
And they'd be non-conforming as a residential in a commercial zone.
Mhm.
And actually, they couldn't have an ADU in the commercial.
So it would still fall in, it's a commercial zone and that's it, but it's grandfathered in right now as residential. And we're assuming it's up to code, or if somebody wanted to move in there, we assume they could.
I was under the impression, though, that the ADU states requiring a lot easier process for...
If I may add to that, the 200 feet generally comes from, in other cities, they use that distance so that if and when the tower falls, that you have enough space to protect the other structures. So that's kind of the general idea of that 200 feet. The ADU cannot be placed in a commercial zone property. So the current structure there now can be used as a residence unless they convert it at once. So it can't go back and forth. So if it was a residence and it was converted to a commercial use, because there's a large warehouse structure on the property as well. So if it was turned into and used as a commercial property, then it cannot go back to a residence. It has to stay as commercial.
Once it goes
to be,
commercial,
to be
that's it.
consistent with the zoning.
Okay.
Correct.
But it's not commercial at this moment. It's still residential.
It's commercially zoned property with a large warehouse and a structure that still looks like a single-family residence, but having looked at it and analyzed it, there's a large concrete paving. It looks like it's a parking lot itself in the front. But again, we could have the applicant kind of go through his analysis on how he tried to contact the property owner, through various means, and he was unsuccessful.
Yeah, my thought is it's residential. It hasn't been formally changed through a permit or a conditional use permit to become anything but residential. So at this point, it's residential. We don't know who owns it.
Correct.
So the applicant's here?
Yes, he is.
Okay. Anything else for staff? Okay, I will open the public hearing part of this and see if we can talk to the applicant a little bit. Welcome. Please state your name and address for the record, please.
Good evening, Planning Commission. My name is Chris Dovini. I work with SmartLink Group. We are the vendor contractor that works on behalf of AT&T. Our company is located at 3300 Irvine Avenue in Newport Beach.
Okay, welcome. Would you like to say a few words, or?
Thanks Soledad for her summary. She pretty much addressed most of the points that I had to make. As far as our efforts to contact the property owner next door, we made several attempts to reach them. Also, under the impression that it was possibly owned by the Promise Church, we tried to contact them at their other location, and we were unsuccessful in getting a response, including, I believe, the property owner of our property where our site is located also made several attempts to contact them and was unsuccessful.
Okay, so you haven't talked to the property owner of the subject property yet?
No, I personally have. Oh, no.
Okay, is it owned by you guys, or?
Property, do you mean by our site?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so that's done,
Yes.
but they didn't know who owned the next door?
We're not positive about who the actual owner is, whether it's the Promise Church or another party.
Okay. All right. Any questions for the applicant? No, I think staff did a pretty good job with kind of summarizing where we're at on this thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I have some people who'd like to speak to this. So the first one I have is Ms. Robin Lowe. Welcome, good evening.
Mr. Chairman, nice to see you.
You too.
Commissioners, thank you. First of all, my name is Robin Lowe, and you have my address of record. I'd like to thank staff, though. Really, Soledad and HP have been tremendous in this effort. I work for the owner of the property that is requesting to move forward with the cell tower, and that is Mr. Doug Jacobs. 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock at night. I have scoped out the property with this house. No coming and going, dark, no lights, plastic on the windows.
You have insomnia?
No, but because of my sinus infection, I slept pretty good the last 4 days. But I do apologize. I haven't been able to find anybody that owns this property. I even went to Redlands. There's someone on the tax rolls that supposedly owns that house. Could not reach them by phone. Their phone's been disconnected. Understood that there was a music business. And a little bit of background, I was on council when Ms. Van Arsdale and I rezoned this block of property. And it was to be used for commercial. We were told at the time no one was ever going to live there. It was going to be converted to a place where they fixed musical instruments and they tuned pianos and so forth. The place currently is a junkyard. It's a pit. And it's a disgrace. The weeds are probably that high in the front yard. Cars, I did notice a car there yesterday. Could not find a person. Went to the front door, banged on the building on the side from my owner's property, and because there were locks on the gates. One night the police stopped me because I was parked across the street And he said, he noticed my plate though, fortunately, and he said, "What are you doing here at this time of the morning?" And I told him, and he said, "We never see anybody here. They come and go mysteriously, I guess, but some cars have been parked there for the last 6 months, and they've never moved. And the stuff that's there in the back is not what you would use to tune or repair a musical instrument. So I have no idea what's going on inside that building. Don't care, really. That's for another department to worry about. But I do know that the current owner of the empty lot, where the tower should go, has made some improvements on it because it had become quite a flood control problem, and they fixed that. And I also found it interesting in my research that they attempted to buy the city lot, which was also purchased under our watch years and years ago, and were directed by the city manager to buy the one next to the building because the city really didn't want to sell the lot. That's another argument. I'll take that up with a council member. But it's been frustrating. I have talked to every music store in Temecula that this person was supposed to own or work for or whatever, talked to some of the musicians that work in those stores. They have no idea who this person is. So I don't know what to tell you. The search proved fruitless. But I do know that an AT&T's tower would be an improvement there because they're willing to landscape the lot, clean it up, level it, make it presentable to the public. Because right now, the whole block is a mess. And the church is a mess. It's a
You don't have any idea how long that place has been vacant. I mean, we can't figure out, find
the
out.
church
No, that house,
Oh,
the
that
boarded up
house?
house.
I've never seen anybody in there in the last at least 15 years.
Okay.
Haven't seen anybody.
All right.
They came in here one night or one day, we had a council meeting, and asked us, they've been planning, they came, and council approved it because Ramona Tire is next door to that, and as you know, I mean, you live here. But, when we first got on council, our police department, and I'm regressing a little bit, because this shows the need for cell service in this valley. And I don't know if you have trouble in your neighborhood. I moved from Hemet West, I retired again a couple months ago, and moved back to Four Seasons. I get one bar. I have to walk around streets. I go to my neighbors, and they're walking too. And it isn't a dog, it's a cell phone we're walking. In the middle of a conversation, you're cut off. And in full disclosure, I did retire from AT&T marketing. I want you to know that. But my retirement is about like that. It's not another thing. Anyway, but it's terrible, and this valley needs service. We need it all over the place. And they're willing to put a tower up at their own expense. I know there's always a push by another company to have them lease space, as they did over at Dodge when I was manager at Hemet West. But they're willing to make that investment and not increase the price because of another lease. And I fully support that. And so it's time that we cleaned up that neighborhood. Anyway, so I ask your indulgence, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next speak, Alice Boyd. Thank you so much for coming tonight. May I get your name and address, please?
Alice Floyd, and I live in 431 Rainier Way in Hemet.
Thank you.
And I didn't know I was going to be number one on the list here. So this is all new to me, but I do know that the one thing I can say is I'm for it. And whatever you decide will be fine with me. And that's about all I have to say.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we hear from Mr. Paul Heller, please? Good evening, sir.
Good evening. My name is Paul Heller. I live at 391 Witcher Way. That's west of Yale and north of Florida. And my cell phone service is crappy. We need more cell phone towers. I'm lucky if I get 2 bars out of the 5 on my phone if I'm in my house.
Yeah.
So,
And that's right, as the applicant pointed out in his letter, I believe it was in the staff report, and I think it was the applicant's letter, they said that many people rely on cell service now. They don't have landlines anymore, and so we really need those for health and safety, so we
I
understand.
don't even have a plug-in unit in the walls of my house for a landline.
Yeah.
So, if it wasn't for Wi-Fi, I wouldn't do anything.
Mr. Heller, I just want to say what I spoke about earlier was that we approved recently another tower over at Columbia and Florida. So you're right over there.
Outstanding.
Yes, so hopefully you will be
Yes,
able
ma'am.
to take advantage of that.
I'm very hopeful for that.
Always dependent on the carrier, right?
Eh,
That's putting in that cell if he's got that service. But anyway, we do need more coverage.
not necessarily. There are a lot of interchanging going on in the air. Thank you.
Right, well, thank you very much. And Kimberly Altman. Welcome, and again, thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. My name is Kimberly Altman, and I live at 450 Keto Circle in Hemet, California, and that's Ketos with 2 I's. I am not responsible for that. And my cell service is not great. Almost anywhere in town, I only have a couple of bars, so anything you can do to help us out, I really appreciate. Thank you so much.
Thanks for speaking up. Would anybody else like to speak to this matter? And the good news for everybody that needs cell service is this is an assumption on my part. I've been doing this quite a while, so that I think the lobbyists for the cell service providers have done a really good job, because it's difficult for municipalities to deny them. And I think there has been in the past a lot of fear about the waves and all this, and they've proven that it really isn't there. And we do need coverage, and now that the landlines are going away, it becomes more and more important. So thank you all for speaking. I will close the public hearing if there's no one else. Okay. Any discussion on the panel? Seeing none?
Well, it concerns me that it's still a residence and it hasn't changed into a commercial, and that there's someone that owns that has a right to use that property for what they.
And I felt the same way. I thought that to me was immaterial, that whether it was empty or not. and somebody could move in there tomorrow. But what I think that staff changed my mind about was that it was actually 249 to the structure itself. So that, as they said, the intent of the 200 feet was in place because the structure itself was 249. It was just 135 to the property line. And in this case, they couldn't build anything closer anyway. So that kind of threw me over the edge.
And these are bigger lots anyway. Both of them are extra long.
Super long, yeah.
So with that, I'd like to move that we adopt resolution bill number 20-006, adopting the findings and approving the variance 20-001 and CUP 19-014, subject to the conditions of approval of attachment 1, and direct staff to file notice of exemption for CEQA purposes with the county clerk.
I will second. That is passed. Congratulations. Okay, and number 5 is another conditional use permit, and this is number 19006 for AT&T Wireless Facility. Thank you, Soledad.
CUP 19
Does that help? I turned up that volume.
Yeah.
Conditional use permit 19-006 is a wireless facility at Spirit of Joy Community Church. The description for this project, it's a 75-foot eucalyptus tree, 12 8-foot antennas, 36 remote radio units, 2-foot microwave. It says 2. I'm not sure if there are 2 or 1 at that location. A GPS antenna, a diesel generator, the cabinets, and other equipment. The leasable area is going to be 960 square feet, and the property is 4.81 acres. The property is owned by Spirit of Joy Community Church, and they're located at 3126 West Johnston Avenue. The general plan land use is quasi-public cultural, and the zoning, it's in the Terra Linda specific plan, but this property is consistent with the C2 commercial standards. The surrounding uses, subdivision to the east and south across Johnston. There's vacant land to the north, and to the southeast is the Edison substation, and to the west, to the west is the substation. It is in the Zone D of Hemet Ryan Airport, so this tower will have to get FAA clearance. Here we have an aerial view and a close-up. This is the entire property of Spirit of Joy. The enclosure is located towards the north part of the property. Co-location is not feasible with the monopalm that is located at 735 South Sanderson. It's not high or large enough to accommodate AT&T's equipment. And because of it being a monopalm, it would not remain stealth. That means camouflaging, of course, the equipment. And over at Crown Castle, there's a monopine at 3500 Tanya. It's not designed to accommodate AT&T equipment. Here we show the distance from the existing monopine to the proposed tower. It is 500 feet, which is what the ordinance allows if the facility is not co-locatable. And it is 200 feet from the nearest residential property. These are the elevations being proposed, the east and north. And here are the photo simulations.
This is looking from Sanderson, looking southeast, from Johnston, looking north. And again, the Planning Commission has authority to review the CUP, and they can approve it, deny it, and based on the conditions of approval. Notice was given to property owners and tenants for a 500-foot radius. It was also published in the Press Enterprise with a 10-day hearing. And at this time, we received one phone call from a concerned citizen that wanted to access the staff report, and I indicated how he could do that from our website. And I didn't receive any comments after that. This project is also exempt from CEQA. It also falls under infill development. And staff is recommending that the Planning Commission adopt Planning Commission Resolution Bill Number 2-005, approving conditional use permit 19-006, subject to conditions of approval, and direct staff to file notice of exemption with the county clerk.
Thank you, Soledad. Questions for staff?
Last meeting, we approved a monopine design that was put in as a monopine so that they could co-locate.
They had room to co-locate.
And so we can't co-locate on this one because it's that's one of my concerns from when, just that we don't leverage existing 80-foot structures.
Let me try to answer that. What Soledad was identifying is the existing monopalm tower that's across the street.
Oh,
That particular one cannot be co-located because the nature of the palm tree.
I misunderstood. I thought you said.
So with that, and the height of that tower is not sufficient in order to provide the 5G antennas on top of that. So that's one of the reasons why they're trying to build a new tower, which would give opportunity to have co-location in the future.
Soledad, do you know anything more about what they're going to have to go through with the airport commission? What's that going to entail? It's 75 foot, right?
Yes,
So
is
they're
it
gonna
navigation easement?
Correct. They'll go through the navigation easement, so basically identifying that there is an airport nearby, and they would, I don't know if they would have to put a light structure on top of the tower itself, but that may be one of the requirements and conditions for that.
Well, I've flown into that airport as a student pilot, and if you're around 75 foot way out there, you're already in trouble. And then you don't know anything about why it's not consistent with AT&T's equipment isn't consistent with the other, and we can talk to the applicant about that. Yeah. Okay. Anything else for staff? Okay, thank you. So I'll open the public hearing, and would you like to speak to this as well? Doing double duty tonight.
Yeah,
That's good.
to make the trips worthwhile.
That's
so.
right.
Again, Crystal Heaney working with SmartLink Group, and yeah, I'd just like to say that we are proposing the eucalyptus tree as the best blend in with the environment, and it is a co-locatable facility. The issue with the SBA palm tree that is in the vicinity, again, yes, it is a monopalm. You cannot co-locate on that. One question that might come up is that you can't co-locate it with a bulb type design that screens the antennas, but that only allows for 3 antennas to be flush up against the palm tree. Our scope obviously is much more than that. Our requirements for this facility is 4 antennas per sector, which is a total of 12 antennas, so that we could not co-locate on a palm tree.
Okay. What about the monopine, I'm sorry, what about the monopine at Tanya?
A monopine can be co-locatable. Are you asking about a specific one?
Yeah, so it says that there was two different locations, the one on Sanderson and then the one on Tanya, and that neither was capable of handling the equipment.
Correct.
One's a monopine, one's a monopalm.
Yeah, that existing monopine currently does have two carriers on it. And again, our RF height requirements is the reason why we're at 75 feet. Our available height on that facility would be approximately topping between probably 45 feet, which would put us too low.
And these are 4G still?
Yes, these are
And so
technology that's going to move us to 4G and eventually 5G.
Okay. And keeping in mind to leave the room, I understand it's a lot smaller footprint for the 5G, but that could accommodate that when the time comes?
Yeah, well, 5G is it's a combination of different technology, different antennas, different locations. And
Okay.
so the smaller antennas you're referring to will be on light poles or
Okay, yeah.
and
And not necessarily at the top of these 75-foot poles?
no, they're all working together, supporting each
Okay,
other,
gotcha.
yeah, to help meet the
Okay.
capacity demands.
And there's no trees around this one? It's on the church property. And
Correct. It's nothing that's going to interfere with it.
Okay, anything for the applicant? Okay, thank you. Well, we have a couple, Robin, would you like to speak to this?
Yes, I would.
Okay,
Thank
we have a couple of people who'd like to speak, so whomever, and we'll start with you, Robin Lowe.
Thank you, sorry. Yes, I'm a member of the Presbyterian Church, and we have one cell antenna. Nearly split the church wide open because there was an offer from Verizon to put another tower in. And unfortunately, the overseeing board at that time didn't want to accept $6,000 a month revenue for the church. Now, I'm not here to judge this, but we all know that denominational churches are dwindling in funding. And this can be a boon for this church because of the concession that they'll get from AT&T to allow this antenna. And I just want you to be aware of that. It could help save that church. I don't know what kind of financial shape they're in. They could have $1 million sitting in the bank for all I know. But most don't. And it would be a blessing for them. I'd also like to say, as a former member, 8 or 10-year member of the Airport Land Use Commission, that this would not interfere in any way with the airport. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. John Henning, like to speak to this? Welcome. Thank you so much for coming. Name and address, please.
Thank you. John Henning, 125 North Sweetser Avenue, Unit 202, Los Angeles, California, 90048. I'm here representing the entity that is controlled by SBA. It's called SBA 2012 PC Assets LLC, which owns and operates the existing tower that's been referred to in the staff report. That's about 500 feet across, Sanderson, across the street.
That's the monopalm?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I know that this commission, I watched the previous item or part of it, I can tell the commission's concerned with coverage. The nice thing is we've already got the coverage. That existing tower can do anything that AT&T wants to do with their tower, the possible exception being height. The height is 60 feet, it's not 75 feet, but our tower could easily be swapped into a 75-foot tower. We could have used a design either identical or similar to what AT&T is using. We could put AT&T on there as a tenant, and you would have all the benefits that you want in coverage and one tower, not two. What you're about to do here is consider whether to put another tower directly across the street from an existing tower that is already being leased to various carriers. SBA is not a company that holds on to its towers and refuses to lease them out. We're in the business, my client, is in the business of leasing out space on towers, and they have multiple tenants oftentimes. Now, AT&T will say, and they've actually already said it, Mr. Doheny said it, and it's actually in the letter that they attach as Exhibit 8, that they make some kind of generic, if you will, somewhat self-serving claims about how they've already tried to get an arrangement with AT&T and have not been successful. That's just not true. And this is what AT&T actually says. The existing monopom, this is the SBA monopom, is not a viable candidate for AT&T because AT&T believes that a reasonable agreement cannot be reached between the parties for co-location on the existing monopom. Your ordinance actually requires them to present you with a justification document accompanied by written documentation showing that they have looked for co-location opportunities. A sentence that says that we don't believe that a reasonable agreement can be reached is not what the code requires to be in the application.
I also took pause with that statement.
Yeah. So, in fact, our marketing director, who I just spoke with about 2 hours ago, has been with this tower for 8 years. 8 years. She was with SBA earlier, and then she changed she was with a different company that had the tower. SBA, I believe, bought the company, and then they acquired the tower, and they got her with the deal. She's been there for 8 years. No one from AT&T has ever contacted her to discuss co-location on that tower. Never. I'm not just talking about the last year or two. I'm talking about 8 years. So to say that they don't believe there can be a negotiation that would lead to acceptable terms, I mean, you haven't even tried. We are totally open to having that negotiation. It won't be me. It's people at the company. They have standard lease terms. And by the way, AT&T is doing this all over the country. They co-locate on SBA towers all over the country and all over California. This is a very familiar road that AT&T can go down. They've just chosen not to do so in this situation. They want to put in a new tower. Now, I think in considering whether you want to just have a duplicative tower next door to another tower, you need to look at the aesthetics. I didn't see the simulations from the first case, and I don't really understand the aesthetics there. But here, you have a very low and rather attractive mid-century church that's there. And everything around it is pretty much, there's no vegetation that's tall. There's no other structures. And you're going to put this thing behind this relatively attractive church with this kind of vista behind it, something that really looks a little bit like a bottle brush. Looks to me like a bottle brush. It really doesn't look a lot like a eucalyptus tree. But people may disagree about the design. The reason why it's a cone shape like that is because it's in the carrier's interest to have a shape that allows the equipment to be maximized along the tree and also means that the equipment can be beyond the scope of the tree so that the equipment's not being blocked. But I'm not saying that all eucalyptus trees, faux eucalyptus trees are bad. I'm saying it is definitely not an asset to the aesthetics of that site. I think it's fair to say that. Now, if you needed the coverage and you wanted to make a trade-off between aesthetics and coverage, that would be one thing. But this is a situation where they have the ability to co-locate and they haven't even really tried. There's a lot of stuff in your code that's pretty clear about the need to blend these towers into the surrounding environment, to camouflage them with existing or proposed topography, buildings, or other structures, about the feasibility that it's supposed to be co-located if that's feasible. This is also a 75-foot tall structure in a place where the height limit is 35 feet. And so it's really quite tall in comparison to other things in the area and in that zone. And by the way, the zone that it's in is also, it's not clear to me that this is consistent with the zoning or the general plan because it's in a special zone that not very much of the city is located in. It's called the quasi-public cultural zone. It's not in a commercial zone. And although potentially cell towers are allowed in this, it's possible that they're allowed in this zone, but it's possible that they aren't, and they certainly don't seem to be consistent with the purposes of the zone, which is for quasi-public institutions like churches, museums, and that sort of thing. It doesn't say anything about cell towers, which are twice as tall as the underlying structure, even if they look like a tree. Now, another thing about this is when you review plans, the plans are in black and white. They don't really show you what the equipment really looks like. And one of the things I'd hate to have this commission get is some buyer's remorse over this project if it's approved. You've got something that looks like a eucalyptus tree in a drawing, but you can also kind of see the cell equipment right there. And your conditions do not refer to, proposed conditions of approval do not refer to any drawings or renderings that show something that really looks like a eucalyptus tree and that forces the applicant to essentially build something that really looks like a eucalyptus tree. You could find yourself in a situation here where it's approved based on these plans, and then you get something and you look at it and you say, boy, that sure looks like a cell tower. And guess what? You're stuck with it. It's a permanent feature of the environment once the permit is granted. So I would urge you to consider these issues. And I wanted to submit a letter. I'm afraid I learned of this case relatively recently, like as in yesterday. And so I have not been able to submit. I was the person that called the staff member, and thank you for taking my call and directing me to the correct location. All I was able to do was come and give you verbal comments, but if the matters continue for any reason or if there's an appeal, I will submit a letter that details these things. I haven't had a chance to write a letter. Otherwise, I would have loved to have given you much more information.
Do you have any information that would help us? My question is, you say the monopalm is 60 foot?
Yeah.
And the applicant is saying that they need 75. I'm assuming they do.
Yeah.
You say that it's possible to, are you saying to replace that or to add on to it somehow?
We would replace it. It's called a swap out. It's the more likely. You could theoretically add to a tower like that, but the more likely thing you would do is just swap something in that's the correct height, and it would require some sort of proceeding with the city to amend our original permit, of course, but that's not too complicated. If the city's inclined to, encourage cell tower coverage, we would quickly apply for that, and then AT&T could locate on that tower.
Okay.
So you certainly wouldn't, how many tenants do you have on there right now?
There is, I believe, just one tenant on there now.
Oh, I thought you said there were multiple.
We can have multiple tenants. And the monopalm design sometimes actually, even though called a monopalm, has multiple tenants on it. We probably would not go with a monopalm design if we went to 75 feet.
So would you go with a eucalyptus design?
It could be eucalyptus or pine or anything that the commission preferred. We could essentially design it to suit whatever the staff or the commission wanted. And theoretically, even if a tree wasn't desired, you could go with some sort of tower or something like that. It's just that it's a relatively tall height, and so trees tend to be the preferred thing.
I can't remember. How long has that been there?
Well, I know it's been there since at least 2012, but I don't know before 2012. Could be much longer.
Thanks to Robin to see. I was trying to remember when that went in, and because you've been in there for quite a while and no one else has co-located with you, and that's what you said, SBA. Is, I think, a small business administration. But because you've been there, have you actively been trying to co-locate others with you?
Well, there is an existing tenant there, and I don't believe they are trying to find a second tenant at this height, although they could accommodate one possibly. They may just be satisfied with the one tenant they have, but oftentimes they wait to see whether the carriers contact them. I mean, they're always available to provide the information at the terms, and they oftentimes passively wait for the carriers to contact them because the carriers are the ones who decide they need the coverage. Some carriers don't have any tower around there at all because they've figured out their coverage some other way. AT&T evidently feels there's a gap that's right about in this location, so they may be relatively unusual in their need for this particular location, but, yeah.
I have friends in that area that are constantly having trouble even, especially inside their homes. And their AT&T, that's who they have for service. So I know there's a need out in that area, and I just wondered why, if you guys have the towers already, you hadn't been aggressive to get other services on there before.
Well, actually, because my client, not being an actual carrier, as a tower owner, doesn't necessarily know that the coverage is bad for AT&T. So it's kind of it's incumbent on AT&T to come, or the customers. The customers don't usually come to the tower companies. They just go to their carrier and complain that they have bad coverage. But normally what happens is customers all complain to a carrier. They realize they have a hole in coverage, and then they either build a tower or they co-locate. And when they want to co-locate, they come to tower owners. And what's curious about this situation is we have we're right there. They know we're there, and they're not calling us. And I think there might be some desire to gain a business advantage, but there is no technical reason. There's a bit of a fallacy that gets played through sometimes in these hearings where AT&T will say that they have a technical need to have their own tower. The equipment is generic equipment that can be modularly added to either tower. They can build a new tower, or we can build a new tower and put it on ours. The only difference to the city and to the customers at AT&T is there's only one tower, there isn't two, and there isn't a big new faux eucalyptus tree standing over a church. I mean, that's the only difference to the residents of your city. Thank you very much.
Mr. Doheny, would you like to rebut this argument? Thank you, and if you'd sign in again, please.
Hi, good evening again. I just want to address some of the comments that were made and try to address them in just kind of general terms. We already did speak about the requirement for having a full array of antenna. Obviously, that can't be met on a monopole. If some other type of design was proposed, design options would be discussed then. One question that would come up when we're discussing design options is, what height requirement we could get. We don't know, standing here without negotiating with SBA, whether we would be in a top position or a second position. Usually, the first carrier on the facility is going to get first choice of that. They're always going to want the top position. Whether they get the 75 feet, the second tenant will get the lower elevation. Whether or not that would, from what we've looked at, that doesn't meet the RF requirements to be at the lower elevation. And kind of that gets back to the nitty-gritty of all of this is, I've done both permitting and lease work, and between the carriers or between the providers, whether it's AT&T, SBA, American Tower, ATC, there's always an underlying master agreement. There's an agreement between the two parties of how their terms, their local lease terms are going to come together. In this case, there isn't one currently. SBA and AT&T have no current master lease agreement. So that's not unusual. For a long time, we did not have one. AT&T did not have one with American Tower. So if there's an American Tower facility or an SBA facility, so generally that's kind of an underlying issue that whether they're working on that in the background, negotiating between themselves, if they can come together and put together some type of master lease agreement, then the local providers can put their underlying lease together based on the terms of that master lease. ATC and AT&T now are better cooperating, so if we do come upon an ATC facility, then if we think that might be an option, then we have at least a underlying agreement to work off of. But right now, there's no such agreement with SBA. And I think that was addressed before in the city of Hemet, whether there's another facility in AT&T